Chapter 1. Beyond Hell's Lies, Awakening to Christ's Non-Dual Message. I was a walking contradiction from the moment I first drew breath on June 17th, 1984. The same day as my sister, born exactly 2 years prior, and on Father's Day nonetheless. I was the fourth of 6 children, a Gemini destined to straddle opposing worlds. I was gifted, yet terrified, deeply loved, yet constantly afraid, hungry for knowledge, yet paralyzed by the weight of salvation itself. Our small Kentucky town reeked of desperation and heroin, where the fortunate found work in warehouses and strip malls, and the rest prayed for miracles from the Section 8 housing they lived in. We lived in a crammed uh, house that was my parents' house. It's the same home that my mother grew up in, and that my father, he grew up right down the street, and they met when they were 18 years old, lovers since high school. And sometimes in that small house, there were 14 souls deep when hardship drove cousins, aunts, and uncles to our doorstep. My grandfather took up a job as a janitor after retirement to help us make ends meet, while my grandmother spent her days as a professional prayer warrior with rosary beads clicking like a broken metronome from dawn until dusk. My mother was a homemaker, so soft spoken you had to lean in to catch her whispers, dedicating her entire existence to her family and Mother Mary in equal measure. My dad carried our family on shoulders that seemed too gentle for the weight, scraping by on $8 an hour, delivering flowers to celebrate other people's joy while we survived on government perishables and food stamps. He eventually found work as a valve technician in a warehouse about an hour out of town, but I knew that he always felt the quiet shame of barely keeping us fed, and it hung heavy on him. And honestly, it hung heavy on me as well. It caused me great sorrow at such a young age. They were genuinely the kindest souls you could ever imagine. I heard my parents raise their voices exactly once in my entire childhood. They remained calm even amidst the harsh winters in a crammed house and uncertainty in finances. Their love was pure and unwavering, but they had inadvertently turned our home into a Catholic theme park of fear. We were by far the most stringently religious family in town, and every single surface of that home screamed of divine judgment. The life-size Virgin Mary statue dominated our living room, her stone foot crushing a serpent's head, while terrified souls burning in purgatory with writhed in pain echoing throughout my tiny little brain. Their marble mouths frozen open in horrifying pleas for mercy. The ultra graphic Stations of the Cross pictures decorated our hallway, showcasing the unfiltered gore of Christ's crucifixion. Outside the living room stood a large bin of holy water, which was our spiritual armor against demons and howling, and our healing tonic when what we were taught to drink whenever we felt unwell. The only books available came from a towering bookshelf that contained exclusively religious texts. No fiction, no children's books, nothing secular that might contaminate both adult and young minds alike. Let me pause for a moment and say I might make errors speaking this audiobook and for these videos, but stay with me. I just don't want to go back and edit and keep this as raw and authentic as possible. You can imagine how terrifying this was for me as a kid, vulnerable and overwhelmed, with a reading level already at high school freshman by age of 10. The weight of those images and teachings sparked a deep, almost paralyzing fear that I couldn't escape. We were on food stamps and government assistance, which added another layer of shame to my spiritual terror. I attended one of the worst performing schools in one of America's most educationally challenged states. There were far more bullies from broken homes than gifted children, and I was, well, the most bullied kid there. My understanding during my adolescent years was that even impure thoughts, if unconfessed, constituted mortal sins worthy of eternal damnation. There's a difference between a mortal sin in the Catholic Church and a venial sin. A venial sin is like when you stub your toe and you go, shit. There's no gravity to it. Only the grave kind of premeditated, I knew better and I shouldn't have done this ones are the ones that are mortal and send you to hell. So I became the quietest kid imaginable, trying to speak as little as possible lest I accidentally damn myself. My developing mind became a battlefield between natural childhood impulses and religious conditioning. Whenever a quote unquote impure thought arose, I would immediately counter with, Jesus, I didn't mean that last thought. I didn't mean that last thought. Please, please, please don't send me to hell. My brain was stuck on spiritual repeat. I remember my first brush with extreme terror. I was 10 years old when I discovered this book called The 3 Days of Darkness on our spiritual bookshelf. What I found inside would haunt my dreams for years and fundamentally alter my relationship with reality itself. The book described the end times in vivid, horrifying detail. Jesus would come again, and at some undisclosed time in the future, but not before 3 days of supernatural darkness came about. A darkness so complete you couldn't even see your hand directly in front of your face. Demons would roam the earth, snatching up humans. They even could project their voices of your loved ones to trick you into opening doors and letting them inside. My mind immediately went to my brother. What if he was outside when this happened? What if a demon caught him in that first flash of darkness? Then what if it came to our door, perfectly mimicking my brother's voice and screaming, Mom, let me in, let me in. My family, not knowing any better, would open the door and the demon would kill all of us. This worried the living shit out of me. Being the only one in the house who read that book, the heavy burden of my family's survival fell squarely on my 10-year-old shoulders. I took it upon myself to carry a tiny blessed candle and matches everywhere, always ready for that day, while secretly hiding to listen to my family's fearful talks about the horrific end times and the urgent need for more and more holy supplies to protect us, because it was only divine light, light that came from blessed candles or from within a church, was the only light that was going to be seen during the 3 days of darkness. You can imagine how embarrassing that was for me to carry around matches and candles everywhere I went. While other kids fantasized about hitting home runs in the major leagues, I was daydreaming of becoming a saint. The only people that I knew who could fend off dark forces effectively. And that's what I wanted. My friends collected baseball cards while I collected stories of martyrs. For my birthday, I requested books about mystics who endured unimaginable suffering for God. Yet even I knew back then that this was not normal childhood behavior. But that was my childhood. Intellectually advanced but emotionally terrorized. Surrounded by unconditional love from my family, yet drowning in existential fear and survivalism. I lived in constant fear of us running out of money, of demons, of hell, of bullies, of death, of everything. I remember wandering to empty parks in the summer, lying alone on the grass, staring up at the clouds and wondering how all this came to be. What was the purpose of existence? Why did everything have to be so terrifying? Jesus, please, I beg you, come out of the sky and tell me what is going on here. And why are you so loving and yet so cruel? These were questions too big and disturbing for my young brain. Looking back now, I can see the greatest scandal of the Catholic Church isn't the pedophile crisis, though that's horrific enough. It's the systematic terrorizing of billions and billions of children throughout all of history with vivid imagery and proclaimed certitude of eternal damnation. We were taught Santa Claus isn't real, but that Jesus, this mystical guy you've never met, is very real, and he's watching you, and he will not hesitate to send you to hell if you don't obey by his rules. The Catholic Church teaches of that they were preaching to kids after the age of 7, which is considered the age of reason, when you're supposedly become accountable for your sins, that they can go, and very easily at that, to a place of eternal torment beyond imagination. Now, for those reading this or hearing this book or hearing the audio from this book or watching these on YouTube, whether you believe in hell or not, there are numerous reasons why it is simply untrue. However, let me offer a brief list of perspectives that took me decades to discover. First, would a loving God, whose love supposedly transcends all human comprehension, actually condemn his own children to eternal torture? Apply the most basic logic here. You wouldn't throw your misbehaving dog into a furnace, let alone your own child. Yet we're asked to believe that divine love operates with less compassion than the average pet owner? Then ask any Christian or Catholic mother who has just lost a child. a child who wasn't religious, who never stepped inside of a church after moving out of their parents' house, who lived entirely outside the faith and in quote unquote sin. If they believed their son or daughter is burning in hell, watch them squirm. Listen to the desperate hedging. I don't know, or I'd like to believe they aren't. The hell doctrine suddenly becomes something that happens to other people's children, never their own. The dogma suddenly becomes a little bit more ambiguous with a little bit more wiggle room when you consider it to be your own children that might be in hell. The loving mother's heart instinctively rejects what her theology demands she accept. In that moment of raw honesty, maternal love expresses the cruel absurdity of the entire construct. If a grieving mother can't bring herself to condemn her own child to eternal flames, what does that say about the God who supposedly designed the whole system? Either human mothers possess greater compassion than the divine, or we've been sold a lie wrapped in scripture. Second, if hell were real and eternal torture awaited the vast majority of humanity, wouldn't Christ have opened every single speech with that dire warning? Imagine him asking his listeners to repeat after him like it's the Pledge of Allegiance. I know, I know, I know. I say this constantly before I start every speech, but once again, repeat after me. You really got to nail this. There is a place of eternal damnation, and most of you are headed there unless you follow my exact instructions. Okay, great. Now that that is out of the way, let me get on with this sermon on this here mount. This seems like rather crucial information to bury beneath parables about sheep and wedding banquets, don't you think? This is insanely crucial. He would have been talking about this all of the time, non-ambiguously. Instead, Christ spoke openly of reincarnation, a concept mysteriously scrubbed from later church doctrine. How convenient, right? Let me give you this Bible quote. For all the prophets and the law have prophesied until John, and if you are willing to receive it, he is Elijah who was to come. That was Matthew 11:13-14. Here, Jesus explicitly identifies John the Baptist as the reincarnation of the prophet Elijah. He reinforces this teaching later when his disciples questioned him about scriptural prophecy. Jesus replied, Elijah indeed is to come and will restore all things. But I say to you that Elijah has come already, and they did not know him, but did to him whatever they wished. So also shall the Son of Man suffer at their hand. Matthew notes that the disciples understood that he had spoken of John the Baptist. That was Matthew 17:10-13. Third, the ascended masters in both history and modern times, including all of the masters that I spoke with and have been mentored by, even the ones heavily devoted to Christ, didn't speak of a dark void after death, let alone an eternal torture chamber. The Buddha, Ramana Maharshi, Nisargadatta, Babaji, Muji, Eckhart Tolle, Adyashanti, the list goes on and on and on. They focused on love, growth, awakening, and your eternal soul being here and now. Your true being, your true nature. The hell obsession was intentionally crafted centuries later as a mechanism of control, a brilliant psychological operation designed to convince people they lived only once, would burn forever if they sinned, and conveniently needed to pay the church for removal of said sins through indulgences. Now, the Catholic Church would later on say, oh, we didn't mean those indulgences, and we regret that part of our history. But nonetheless, back then, it had become a phenomenal money-making machine to fund wars, conquests, and the accumulation of temporal power. It's a genius and simplistic scene when you think about it. Created existential terror so profound that people would surrender both their wealth and their autonomy to avoid it. Selling indulgences to the terrified masses proved far more lucrative than Jesus' actual message of inner transformation. Now step back and reflect. Could there be a more perfect way to bend people to your will? I mean, if I was going to design a system to control people, this is exactly what I would do. And, mankind has an extensive track record of fabricating fear, creating lies, and consolidating power for personal gain. And yet Christians somehow assume that the largest institution in the history of mankind would somehow act differently. Again, when Christ said the kingdom of heaven is within, he meant not after death, not in opposition to some hellish realm, but accessible here and now through inner realization. This teaching renders the entire power structure obsolete. If divinity exists within each person, what need is there for intermediaries, confession booths, or payment plans for salvation, right? The church fathers understood this threat perfectly. A population that believed in multiple lifetimes and inner divinity could not be controlled through fear. But a population convinced they had one shot at avoiding eternal torture, they would hand over everything, their money, their children, their very capacity for independent thought to avoid hell. Heaven is here. There is nowhere else. Heaven is now. There is no other time. That's a quote from A Course in Miracles. It's no accident that church attendance is dropping worldwide as more and more people are awakening to deeper truths. With greater access to spiritual teachings, enlightened masters, and knowledge that's long been hidden, people are starting to realize what mystics have always known. Things that organized religion has tried to keep secret. The internet age has demolished the church's monopoly on spiritual transfer information, and with that is a direct correlation to a decrease in church attendance. Ancient wisdom traditions, once buried in monastery libraries, are now available with a few keystrokes. Teachings on non-duality, consciousness research, near-death experience studies, and quantum physics are reaching hundreds of millions of people who would never have encountered them in previous eras. Isn't it great to be born now? I don't think it's any coincidence you are born now and listening to this video or reading this book. Fourth, meta-analysis of near-death experiences consistently show people encountering unconditional love and learning they are eternal beings. Less than 1% of NDEs report terrifying places. Even among those experiences, they typically describe seeing exactly what they needed to see to change their lives, to wake them the heck up. As Tom Campbell puts it, it's the larger consciousness system, the LCS, again, another word for the absolute, the divine, God, showing you exactly what you need to see to help you grow up to your true nature. Sometimes you need something so dramatic and fear-inducing that it's the only way to get you straight. He's referring to the horrifying things that people with NDE see. That was the only thing they needed coming from God, the LCS, to wake them up and get them to change. For 2,000 years, Abrahamic religions have been pushing a false narrative of separation consciousness, a misinterpretation of Jesus' true non-dual teachings. Modern Christian teachings on hell came from the judgmental and judicial gospel of a former Pharisee and prosecutor of early Christians named Saul, who never even knew Jesus. Lastly, Christ spoke directly of non-duality and unity consciousness, teachings that institutional Christianity has systematically obscured or misinterpreted for 2 millennia. In John 10:30, he said, "The Father and I are one." This isn't a claim of exclusive divinity, but a declaration of the ultimate truth that mystics across all traditions have discovered, that the illusory nature of separation between self and source is just that, an illusion. When Jesus proclaimed, "You are the salt of the earth, you are the light of the world," in Matthew 5:13-14, he wasn't speaking metaphorically. From a non-dualistic perspective, he was encouraging recognition of our fundamental interconnectedness with all of existence. Like salt, we infuse essence into life. As light, we dispel the darkness of ignorance. This unity reveals the interdependence of all creation. There is no quote-unquote other to save or condemn. His teachings on love go beyond the usual us versus them thinking. Remember when he said, "You've heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." In a true non-dualistic way of thinking, love is confined to a selective group but extends to all beings, even those we see as enemies. This love breaks down the walls that make us believe in quote-unquote enemies in the first place. When you realize that all beings are connected to the divine, resistance just fades away naturally. The golden rule itself, love your neighbor as yourself, takes on profound new meaning when you realize that there's no fundamental difference between self and neighbor. You literally are loving yourself because at the deepest level of reality, there is only one consciousness experiencing itself subjectively through billions of apparent forms. Now, we're going to cover that more later in the book and in the later videos. But for now, let's take a deeper look at Christ's true teachings. And to get that, I recommend reading the book Christ Returns, Speaks His Truth, the Christ Letters. It's a channeled work from an anonymous person that did the channeling, and she had to raise her vibration over the course of months to be able to channel such a powerful transmission from Christ. And what it conveys is Jesus' own enlightenment during the 40 days in the desert in part. It reveals his awakening to the unified field underlying all existence, clarifies the true meaning of his famous messages and how they were distorted, and presents his teachings as a call to recognize our divine nature in the illusion of separation, not a meeting with a separate deity. He goes over this time and time and time again in the book, and I cannot recommend reading this enough. Now, whether one accepts the channeled nature or not, though it has been confirmed by at least 2 master teachers of mine as being legit, and after the first time reading it, within minutes, I had a consciousness shift because the book carries a transmission within it. But this goes beyond just the book itself, because there are many mystical traditions that have radically different interpretations of the Christian doctrine, which teaches about unity and love. Read it, and you will feel the truth inside its pages, undoubtedly. But try explaining any of this to a 10-year-old carrying blessed candles everywhere and obsessively monitoring his thoughts for sins. That Catholic programming worked exactly as it was designed to. And right from the get-go, it broke me down and built a cage of fear, one I carried well into adulthood. That is, until my awakening shattered those chains and set me free.